One moment, one choice, and an entire life that changed forever. Sometimes, all someone needs is a simple act of humanity to remember that love is still possible. And when the world turns its back, it might be right there that a new beginning starts. If you've made it here, take a deep breath. What you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a reminder, one of those we need when the heart has almost stopped believing. A reminder that there are encounters that heal, and loves that are born in silence, yet remain forever. Before we begin, I have a sincere invitation for you. Subscribe to the channel. Yes, right now. Because when you do, you help this story reach someone who might need comfort today. A hug that arrives in the form of words. A gentle touch for the soul, wrapped in storytelling. Here, every story is more than entertainment. It's a piece of truth, of hope, of humanity. And you are part of it.so stay until the end. Because what begins with a simple gesture will remind you that true love doesn't have to shout. It simply stays. The rain fell quietly over the streets of Harper Hill, a small town where everything seemed predictable. Everything, except for Melanie, returning from her night shift at the bakery, her feet soaked and her soul weary. She clutched a small bag. To her chest, gauze, band-aids, and a tiny bottle of antiseptic, left over from the community kit she kept with donations. The gray sky mirrored the emptiness she often felt, yet she walked with steady steps. The crooked umbrella nearly flew from the wind, but Melanie gripped it with determination. As she crossed the bridge on the main street, something strange caught her eye. A body lay huddled near the stone railing, and the world seemed to stop. For a moment, she looked around. No one, not a living soul besides her. Her first reaction was caution. It could be dangerous. But the second was instinctive. She approached slowly, her eyes sharp. A man, drenched, with blood trickling down his leg and labored breathing, tried to stand but failed. His hood covered part of his face, and his hands were stained with blood and grease. A motorcycle lying a few meters away explained the accident. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked firmly, yet gently that a low groan was all he managed. Melanie knelt on the wet ground, ignoring the cold, and opened the bag with the kit. "You're hurt. I'm going to take care of it." "All right," she said, trying to sound calm despite her racing heart. The man didn't answer, just stayed still as she took out gauze and began cleaning the wound on his leg with gentle movements. The blood mixed slowly with the rainwater running down. Melanie had seen worse injuries, but there was something in his silence that unsettled her. He wasn't just a stranger in pain. He seemed like a man carrying far more hurt than he showed. "This is going to sting a little," she warned before applying the antiseptic. The man let out a faint groan but didn't complain. Melanie noticed. His eyes were open, following her every move. They were the eyes of someone who expected betrayal at any moment. "You don't have a phone? Anyone I can call for you?" she asked. He looked away. "No," was all he said. His rough voice, muffled by the rain, carried a firmness that hid vulnerability. "Then let me help you," she replied, not asking for permission. And she kept tending to him with the same tenderness she gave her own brothers. When she finished wrapping the wound, Melanie rose slowly and offered her hand. "Can you stand?" The man hesitated, then took it. He was tall, strong, but in that moment he seemed fragile, like everything in him was about to collapse. He staggered, leaning on her, and Melanie felt not only the physical weight, but the emotional one as well. "Thank you," he murmured. "I'm not used to this." "To what?" she asked, frowning. "To someone stopping. Someone helping." Melanie looked at him for a moment. This wasn't just a throwaway comment. It was a confession. "Maybe you've been around the wrong people," she said, trying to keep it light. A faint smile touched his lips but quickly vanished. The silence between them stretched for a few seconds, as if something was being built there, still shapeless. "Aiden," he would say soon enough, seemed ready to run, yet tied to something unseen. "What's your name?" he asked, still, not offering his. "Melanie. Melanie," he repeated, almost like a secret. "And you?" "Aiden." That was it. No last name. No more words. She didn't know she was standing before one of the most powerful names in the country, and he didn't know he was standing before the only person who would still see the man behind the fortune. Aiden adjusted his coat sleeve and walked over to the fallen bike. He tried to lift it himself, but Melanie stepped in to help. "You need to rest. There's a hotel just around the corner. I can take you there. He hesitated. I don't want to draw attention. Then you're in the right place. In Harper Hill, no one pays attention to anyone. He smiled, but something in the gesture was broken, like smiling was an effort. And in that moment, Melanie knew he wasn't an ordinary man. They walked together to the small-town hotel, with its old facade and the scent of damp wood. Melanie spoke with the receptionist, made sure the room would be discreet, and left a few coins on the counter. Aiden watched her in silence. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked. "You don't even know me." She looked him in the eye. "I don't have to know you to help. Sometimes you just do the right thing." Then she turned to leave, giving him the only thing money couldn't buy. Dignity. 3 days later, Melanie was arranging apple pies at the bakery counter when a black luxury car stopped out front. She almost dropped the tray. Out stepped Aiden, clean, elegant, in a dark suit and steady gaze. He looked like a different man, but his eyes were the same. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice steadier now. The customers fell silent. All eyes turned to her, and Melanie felt her knees weaken. "You came back," she said, more as a statement than surprise. "You helped me, and you didn't know me. And now you know me?" "No, but I'd like to." She didn't know what to say. He went on. "I wanted to thank you, and maybe return the favor." Melanie invited him to sit on the bench outside the bakery. The conversation was awkward at first, two people from opposite worlds trying to find words. That wouldn't hurt. Aiden seemed uncomfortable in the humble setting, but he didn't complain. She offered him a slice of pie. He accepted. They ate in silence for a few minutes. "Why were you alone that day?" she asked. He looked away. "Let's just say I was running." Melanie didn't push. She knew how to respect someone's pace. Aiden took a deep breath. "You don't know who I am, do you?" "No, and that is a relief." She smiled. "Then let's keep it that way." That same afternoon, the rumors began. A passing journalist recognized him. Aiden Moore, CEO of Moore Enterprises, one of the richest men in the country. Online headlines spread fast. "Missing billionaire spotted in small rural town." When Melanie read it, her stomach turned. The man she had helped in the rain was a ghost of luxury. The bakery became a center of curiosity. But Aiden didn't hide. He came back every day, always at 4 p.m., as if it was the only time that made sense. Melanie tried to keep her distance, but there was something about him that pulled her back. He seemed calmer around her, real, as if, for a while, he could just be Aiden, and not the CEO of the empire everyone feared. One day, he showed up without bodyguards, without a car. "Can I wash the dishes today?" he asked with a smile. Melanie looked at him like he was insane. "You want to wash dishes?" "Yes. Maybe washing plates will help me clean other things too." She handed him the towel and turned away, smiling. And he, for the first time in a long time, smiled too. People whispered, "She's only with him for the money. He'll get bored of her soon." Melanie heard it all in silence. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Aiden didn't explain himself either. But they both knew what was growing there wasn't a game. It was something impossible to explain. At the end of the week, he invited her for a walk. No questions, no promises, he said. Just the two of them, strolling under the amber lights of the square. They talked about music, childhood, fears. And halfway through, he stopped. "You saw me when I didn't want to be seen." She simply replied, "Maybe because you deserve to be seen." When the night ended, Aiden leaned against his car. "Thank you for the pie, the words, the humanity." Melanie swallowed hard. "You don't need to thank me, but I want to. You gave me back something I had lost." "What?" "The desire to go home." She watched him get into the car and disappear around the bend in the road. Her heart was beating faster. She knew this was only the beginning. The wound he carried wasn't physical, it was in his soul. And maybe she knew how to heal it. Not with promises, but with presence. And it had all begun with a bandage in the rain. Aiden had started showing up at the bakery every day, as if that small, fragrant place had become his new anchor point. Melanie pretended not to notice, but the truth was her routine now waited for him. The bell above the door would chime, and her heart would skip a beat, though she would deny it. He was no longer the wounded man in the rain, but neither was he just the elegant CEO the papers portrayed. Here, Aiden was a man in the middle of rebuilding himself. The silence between them was comfortable, and when they did talk, their eyes spoke more than their words. Even without touching, a bond was already forming. Melanie kept working hard. She woke up early, mopped the bakery floors, prepared the day's batches, and served customers with the same warm smile as always. She was admired by everyone there, but had always been discreet. She took pride in her independence, despite the daily struggles. She didn't know what luxury felt like, but she understood the value of simple things and refused to depend on anyone. Aiden noticed this and respected it. He never tried to impress her with numbers or status. If anything, the more time he spent with her, the more he shed those labels. He wanted to be seen as a man, not as a brand. One evening, as they were closing the bakery together, Aiden broke the silence. Ever wanted to run away from everything? Melanie chuckled. Isn't that what you're always doing? He looked at her with disarming sincerity. This time, I'm not running. I'm trying to find something. She studied him for a moment before asking, what exactly did you lose? He looked away, thoughtful. Peace, truth, and maybe myself. That answer echoed in her mind for days. Their connection grew quietly, but the outside world was not forgiving of mysteries. The press began showing up in town, discreetly. Photographers lurked, trying to catch Aiden with the so-called bakery girl. Blogs started publishing theories. New romance for the reclusive billionaire? Melanie Thompson, from ovens to opulence. She felt invaded. She had never asked for any of this. Aiden noticed her discomfort. I can make this stop, he said, but you'll hate me for it. She replied without hesitation. Just promise me you'll be honest with me. He didn't promise, but he didn't lie. Either. One gray afternoon, Aiden arrived with a tense expression. I have to go to New York for a few days. Business matters. Melanie only nodded. I want you to come with me. She looked at him as if she'd misheard. Me? To New York? Yes. Not as an accessory. As my support. Melanie took a deep breath. You know how this is going to look, right? If you care what people think, this will never work. She lowered her gaze. I'm not part of that world, Aiden. That's exactly why I need you in it. The invitation wasn't romantic. It was almost a plea for help. 2 days later, she stepped into a black car with him and headed toward the helicopter that would take them to Manhattan. Melanie had never flown before. She stayed silent the entire time, gripping the side of her seat. Aiden watched her with a mix of care and fascination. You okay? He asked. I'm just wondering what I'm doing here, she replied. And with a low voice, he said, changing my life. She pretended not to hear, but her heart answered for her. The hotel was luxurious, more mirrors than walls. Melanie felt like a fish out of water, walking slowly so she wouldn't knock anything over. Aiden noticed. Want me to switch to a simpler room? She asked, flustered. I want you to be comfortable, not impressed. She smiled faintly. This doesn't impress me. It just makes me uneasy. And he replied honestly. Then, help me make it into something that feels right. The next day, Aiden had an important board meeting. He asked Melanie to stay at the hotel, but she insisted on walking him to the building, even if only to the reception. As soon as they arrived, judgmental stares began. Is that her? The bakery girl? That one. Melanie didn't react, but her blood boiled. A receptionist ignored her entirely until Aiden spoke up. She's with me. Treat her with the same respect you'd want for yourself. It caught everyone off guard and made Melanie feel, maybe, for the first time, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later, back at the hotel, she confronted him. You don't need to defend me. I'm used to looks like that. Well, you'd better get used to the opposite too. The world doesn't change just because you say so. But I can change my world. She drew in a slow breath. And I can keep being who I am. That's what I want most. That night, he took her to dinner in a quiet restaurant. No journalists, no assistants, just the two of them, and a table lit by soft candlelight. She asked, Is this how you live? No, this is how I survive. And what do you really want? He took his time before answering. Something that doesn't disappear when the lights go out. In the following days, they began walking through Manhattan together. Aiden showed her his world, buildings, foundations, offices. Melanie showed him the value of simply watching people and listening to the real sounds of the city. She took him to a tiny cafe hidden in the village. He had never drunk coffee from. A paper cup. Tastes like real people, he joked. It's the taste of life without filters, she replied as he brought her to his office. Showed her his desk, his projects, his numbers. But what struck her most were the photos tucked away in a drawer. A blonde woman, smiling, holding a boy in her arms. Aiden noticed her gaze. My sister and my nephew. They were both killed in an accident 5 years ago. She simply reached for his hand and held it. Without words, Aiden opened up like never before. He spoke of the guilt, the distance from his family, the grief that turned him to stone. Since then, I haven't trusted anyone, not even myself. Melanie didn't try to fix it. She just listened. And in doing so, she gave him what no one else could, presence. Without conditions, without judgment, the return to Harper Hill was quiet. But something was different. Aiden seemed lighter, more whole. Melanie, on the other hand, felt conflicted. She wasn't sure if the feelings growing inside her were mutual or dangerous. Deep down, she knew her heart was no longer hers. But she wasn't sure if he knew what to do with it. Back at the bakery, everything was in its place. Except her. Aiden's words kept echoing. You changed my world. But what? About hers? He could remain rich, powerful, but she was still just Melanie. Or maybe she would never again be just anything. That afternoon, he showed up again. With simple flowers, daisies, not roses. Got these because I thought they suited you better. She smiled. Did I get it right? More than you know. And for the first time, she felt like staying. A customer whispered near the counter. Seriously? You're with that guy? She replied calmly. Seriously? You still think you know what love is? The man went silent. The whole bakery went quiet for a moment. Aiden watched her with quiet admiration. Melanie returned to the counter and served the next pie. No rush, no show. But inside, her heart burned. Not from insecurity, but from the certainty she was stepping into something bigger. Something that couldn't be measured in numbers, only in presence. The sun set slowly behind the city buildings. The bakery was closing when Aiden leaned against the doorframe. If I told you I'm trying to learn how to live, she replied, I'll teach you, but you have to truly want to learn. He smiled. Then teach me how to start. And that night, without promises, began something neither of them had imagined. The beginning of something real. In the days that followed, Aiden's presence in Harper Hill stopped being a surprise and became fuel for speculation. Every step he took beside Melanie was met with stares, whispers, and silent judgments. He seemed unfazed, but Melanie felt the weight pressing on her shoulders. It was as if, suddenly, her story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to everyone. She's not a match for him, they said. It's just a phase. Melanie pretended not to hear, but at night, lying in bed, every word echoed in her mind. Aiden noticed her discomfort. Even without her saying a word, he could tell from her guarded gestures, her distant gaze, the way she avoided walking beside him in public. Are you trying to hide from me? He asked one day, as they walked near the lake. Not from you. From what people think you represent. He frowned. I'm not a symbol, Melanie. Not to me, but to the rest of the world, yes. And I'm just me. Aiden stopped walking. And that's exactly what scares me the most, that you think being just you isn't enough. Melanie didn't respond. His words cut through her like a knife. She had spent her whole life trying to prove her worth, even when no one was watching. And now, in the moment someone finally saw beyond the surface, she doubted herself, not from insecurity, but from exhaustion. You'll never understand what it's like to be underestimated all the time, she said. No, he admitted. But I know what it's like to be seen only for what you can offer, and not for who you are. It was the first time they both realized that, even from different worlds, they carried the same kind of loneliness. The next morning, a luxury car stopped in front of the bakery. Out stepped a tall blonde woman, her stride calculated, her gaze sharp. I'm looking for Aiden Moore, she said with a voice almost too sweet. Melanie pointed toward the back, where he was helping carry sacks of flour. The woman laughed. Carrying flour? He really must be lost. Melanie simply replied, maybe he's finally found himself. But inside, she felt a pang of unease. The woman was clearly from his past, and she seemed determined to be part of his present. Aiden came out, wiping his hands on his shirt. When he saw her, his expression changed. What are you doing here? Rachel, trying to understand what you're doing here. You gave up everything for this. She shot a pointed look at Melanie. Aiden was firm. I didn't give up anything. I just realized what really matters. Rachel let out a mocking laugh. You always had that self-sabotaging streak. Melanie turned to leave, but Aiden caught her arm. Stay? Please. She hesitated. She didn't know if she wanted to be part of that kind of battle, but she stayed. After Rachel's visit, the rumors came back in full force. Now they said Melanie was just another fleeting fling, and that Aiden would soon return to what he belonged to. She tried to ignore it, but the pain began leaking into the small things. She spoke less, avoided eye contact, smiled less often. Aiden noticed. I don't want to hurt you, he said one night. But you are, she replied. Honestly, not because of who you are, but because you're dragging me into a world where everything is about appearances, and I don't have a mask to wear. Aiden stayed quiet. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. He'd always had control over numbers, decisions, narratives. But here, in front of Melanie, everything slipped through his fingers. She was too real to be manipulated, too strong to be molded, and that fascinated him as much as it scared him. Tell me what you need, he asked. Melanie looked at him with tired eyes. I need to know that when this all blows up, you'll still be here. He swallowed hard. I will. But for the first time, even he doubted his own promise. The following Saturday, there was a town square event, a charity fair organized by the locals. Melanie, as always, was at the forefront of it all. Aiden offered to help, and for the first time, he was seen as part of the community. He carried boxes, set up stalls, served pies. The children laughed with him, and the adults began to change their view. He's simpler than he looks, one woman remarked. Melanie watched from a distance, her heart torn. She knew this peace was temporary, but for a few hours, she wished it could be permanent. During the event, Aiden took Melanie by the hand and led her to the gazebo. I want you to see through my eyes, he said. See what? You. She smiled, puzzled. You're the only thing in this place that makes me feel human. And Melanie felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. But the next day brought reality crashing back. An article had been published in a major gossip site. Billionaire abandoned by ex-fiancé seeks refuge with small-town local. A photo of Melanie at the fair, with Aiden in the background, was splashed across the page. The text was cruel, sensationalist, calling her a gold digger. When she read it, Melanie felt the ground vanish beneath her. This wasn't just about her. It was about her integrity, her truth, and that hurt more than any humiliation she'd ever endured. For the first time, she thought about giving up. Aiden came home late that night, breathless, phone in hand. I had the article taken down. We'll sue. Melanie cut him off. It's no use. It's already out there. People have read it. They've judged. He tried to get closer, but she stepped back. You can get out of this with money. I can't. I'll carry this image forever. Aiden didn't know what to say. For the first time, he saw the real damage his world could inflict on hers. And there wasn't a check that could fix it. The next day, Melanie went to work as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The stares lasted longer, sharper. Some customers ignored her completely. Others spoke loudly on purpose. Thought, you'd be a princess by now. These girls think love buys status. Melanie kept smiling, but inside, something was withering. Silent pain was the most dangerous kind. And she knew. She was starting to lose herself. Aiden kept trying to see her, but she began to avoid him. She claimed she was tired, busy, had no time. He didn't believe her, but he respected it. Until one night, he knocked on her door. If you want me to go away, say it while looking me in the eye. Melanie hesitated and couldn't say a word that he stepped closer. I won't pretend I understand what you feel, but I want to learn. She was too exhausted to resist. I don't want to feel small beside you, Aiden. Then let me learn to walk at your height. Her eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, they weren't from anger. They were from hope. They spent that night together, not as lovers, but as two survivors trying to figure out how to save each other. Sitting on the floor of her living room, eating bread and cheese, laughing over childhood stories. It was the lightest night they'd had since the beginning, and also the most intimate. You're different from anyone I've ever known, Aiden said. And you're everything I once promised myself. I'd never have, she replied. But the look they exchanged said, it was already too late to go back. The next morning, Aiden left quietly. He left a note on the table. Meet me at the bakery at 4. Melanie arrived early. The place was empty. She waited and waited, but he never came. The clock struck 5, then 6. She stepped out for a walk, trying not to think the worst. But her phone buzzed with a notification. Aiden Moore hospitalized after attempted mugging outside conference hall. The world froze. Melanie's hands trembled, and the only thought she had was, I should have been there. At the hospital, reporters crowded the entrance. Melanie used the back way in, as she always did. When she reached the room, Aiden was asleep, scratches on his face, a bandage on his arm. She sat beside him in silence, holding his hand. He slowly woke and gave a faint smile. You came. You thought I wouldn't? He tried to sit up, but groaned in pain. Shoo, stay still. Aiden closed his eyes. Hurting you was the last thing I wanted. But it still happened. I know. And still, I'm here. Melanie stayed the night, in silence, watching the man who had changed her life. Not because of the money, but because, with him, she had learned to look at herself with more tenderness. Love was still a distant possibility, but in that cold hospital room, between broken promises and intertwined hands, grew the courage to keep going. The sun rose shyly that morning in Harper Hill, but Melanie didn't see the dawn. She was still at the hospital, sitting beside Aiden, her eyes fixed on the white wall of the room. He was sleeping deeply, and the sound of the monitors was the only sign that everything was still working. Inside her, however, a storm was brewing. Between the hurt, the fear, and the exhaustion, one uncomfortable question kept surfacing. How far was it worth fighting for someone who came from such a different world? She didn't want to be rescued. She wanted to walk beside him. But did Aiden truly know how to do that? When he woke up, his first instinct was to reach for her hand. Melanie gave him a gentle smile, but her tired eyes couldn't hide the weight of the night. You stayed here? He asked, surprised. Staying is the least you do for someone who matters, she replied. Aiden tried to smile, but his face still hurt. I'm sorry for everything. For dragging you into this, for not showing up, for leaving you alone again. Melanie shook her head. You didn't leave me alone, but I'm starting to understand that being with you also means being alone sometimes. And that hurt more than any physical wound. The next day, Aiden was discharged. The press was waiting for him at the hospital entrance, but he slipped out through a side door with Melanie. Hand in hand, they walked like two survivors, not of an accident, but of an emotional war. Once they got into the car, his phone lit up with urgent messages. Advisors, lawyers, shareholders. The corporate world didn't forgive absences. I have to go to New York tomorrow, he said awkwardly. Melanie nodded, already knowing it meant being left behind again. You're going alone? She asked. He hesitated. If you come, it'll be harder. The night before the trip, they had dinner in silence at her house. The place was simple, smelling of fresh bread, with dishes drying in the rack. Aiden looked out a place there, but he tried to adapt. Have you ever thought about living somewhere else? He asked, staring into his cup of tea. I have, but every time I think about it, I remember it's not the place that holds me. It's the roots I've grown here. Aiden nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a language he didn't speak. And what if I told you I wanted you close in any city? Melanie looked at him calmly. Do you want that? Or do you just want to take me further from who I am? The question lingered in the air. Aiden didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know the answer yet. He was torn between the man the world expected him to be, relentless, strategic, always in control, and the man Melanie brought out in him, more human, more vulnerable. That night, they slept apart, even though they longed to be close. Not out of pride, but out of respect for each other's space. They both knew the next conversation could change everything, or fix it, or break it. Aiden's trip would last 3 days. Melanie tried to focus on the bakery, but her mind kept wandering back to him. During a delivery, she saw a new photo on a financial news site. Aiden at a conference, smiling beside Rachel, his ex-fiancée. The headline was cruel. Old ties, new possibilities? Melanie's stomach twisted. She knew the media could twist things, but the image spoke for itself. He looked comfortable next to someone who belonged in that world, someone who knew how to dance to his rhythm. And she didn't even know the music. When he called that night, his voice was different. It went well here, but exhausting. Melanie tried to sound casual. I saw some pictures. Silence on the other end. It's not what it looks like, he said. You don't have to explain, she cut in. I just needed to remember the place I hold in your life. Aiden insisted, you hold a place no one else does. But the line sounded too rehearsed. Melanie didn't want well-polished words anymore. She wanted gestures. Truth. Presents. On the third day, Aiden showed up at the bakery without warning. He looked visibly tired, but his eyes were locked on her. Forgive me, he said before even saying hello. For exposing you, for not protecting you, for not making you a priority. Melanie crossed her arms. You don't need to protect me, Aiden, but you do need to respect me. You need to choose. He stepped closer, slowly. And if I choose you, but still have to live in that world? She sighed. Then tell me how to be part of it without losing who I am. The next days were a blur. Aiden tried to compensate with presents, but his phone never stopped. Melanie tried to pretend everything was fine, but the pain of feeling secondary was constant. One afternoon at lunch, she said, We're trying to make this work, but it feels like the whole world is pushing us apart. Aiden held her hand. What if we created our own world, just us? She gave a faint smile. You can't build a world by running away, Aiden. You build it on a foundation. He lowered his gaze, knowing she was right. That week, the town square hosted its music festival. Melanie almost didn't go, but Aiden insisted. You love this festival. Let me go with you. She gave in. They wandered among the lights, ate cotton candy, listened to the local band. For a few hours, everything felt normal. But then Rachel appeared. Yes, she was there. She walked toward them, already knowing the effect she would cause. Aiden, Melanie. Her tone was cold. I see you've adapted well to small-town life, she told him, before turning to Melanie. I hope you know what you're getting into. Melanie stayed silent. Aiden tried to end the conversation, but Rachel smirked. He's got a good heart, but when the game starts, he chooses the ones who know how to play. The words hung in the air like poison, and even though Melanie didn't want to believe them, they sank in. Later that night, alone, she wondered, what if Rachel is right? Their final conversation that night was silent. They sat side by side, yet far apart. He searched for words. She searched for air. Finally, he said, I'm trying, Mel. And she replied, maybe trying isn't enough anymore. The next morning, Melanie wrote a letter. Not for drama, but because she needed to put her feelings in order. In it, she said everything she could never say looking into his eyes. She wrote about the pain of loving someone who didn't know how to stay. About the fear of losing herself trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers. And about the courage to choose herself, even while loving someone like him. She left the letter at his door and walked away. Aiden read it sitting on his porch floor. Melanie's words were like blows, direct, firm, honest. But in them was also a love so true it hurt. He cried, not as a fragile man, but as someone who finally understood what he'd done. In his rush to hold her, he had smothered who she was. In his need to keep her close, he'd forgotten to give her space. And in the end, he realized love wasn't about saving. It was about listening. He tried calling, but she didn't answer. He went to the bakery, but she wasn't there. 2 days passed. 2 long days in which Aiden learned what it meant to live without her. Without her quiet presence. Without the gaze that humanized him. He had never felt so empty, not even when he'd lost everything before. Because now, he knew exactly what he stood to lose. That on the third night, Melanie came home to find flowers on her doorstep. But not roses, daisies. And with them, a handwritten note. I still don't know how to dance to your rhythm, but I want to learn, if you'll let me try again. She sat on the step, the note in her hands. Yes, she was tired, but something in her still wanted to believe. She didn't reply that day, nor the next. But little by little, she returned to the bakery. She smiled at customers again. She breathed without rushing. And when Aiden appeared once more, she didn't push him away. But she didn't open her arms either. He understood. Love needed to learn to walk again. Without rush. Without promises. Only with presence. He began visiting her without warning, just to sit in silence. He brought coffee, swept the floor, told childhood stories. And slowly, he rebuilt something real. One afternoon, she finally said, I don't want a prince. I just want someone who stays. And he replied, with raw honesty, so do I. And this time, I want to learn how to stay right. It wasn't a restart with fireworks, but it was the truest they could have, because it came after the pain. And so, at the end of the hardest chapter, their love stopped being ideal and became real, with flaws, pauses, and restarts. Because truth, when it hurts, also teaches. And those who listen learn to love better, even if it's for the second time. The new phase between Melanie and Aiden began without dramatic declarations, without eternal vows. It started with small gestures. Him stopping by to take the trash from the sidewalk, her saving an extra slice of pie just for him. It was all subtle, almost invisible to anyone expecting soap opera scenes. But for them, this was building. And building, they had learned, required more patience than passion. It required comfortable silences. It required accepting that starting over hurts, but is worth it. Aiden no longer sought to impress. He just wanted to stay. Little by little, the town began to get used to his presence. Not as the eccentric billionaire, but as the guy who helps at the charity bazaar, the one who cleans the square, the one who waits for her out front with hot coffee. Judgment gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to respect. Some still doubted, of course, but Melanie had learned to filter it out. Her focus was no longer on pleasing the world, but on nurturing what mattered. And Aiden, who once hid behind numbers, was now slowly shedding his armor. And each piece that fell away revealed someone better. One cold afternoon, Melanie was closing the bakery when she saw Aiden sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against the wall with a notebook on his lap. "Writing your memoirs?" she teased. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe I'm just trying to figure out who I am now." She sat beside him. "And who do you think that is?" He looked at her, serious. "Someone who has a lot to learn, but for the first time, doesn't want to learn alone." Melanie smiled. And for the first time in a long while, she felt she could trust what was growing between them. The following week, a young woman named Ellie came to town to write an article on small businesses on the rise. Melanie thought it would just be a simple interview about the bakery. But when Aiden showed up in the middle of the conversation, Ellie noticed there was more to it. "You're Aiden Moore, right?" He nodded with a reserved smile. "And what's a man like you doing here?" Aiden answered calmly, "Trying to figure out what's truly worth it." Ellie smiled, but Melanie felt a chill. Not everyone knew how to hear an honest answer without twisting it. The article came out 2 days later. Billionaire Finds Purpose, alongside Small Town Baker. The title was offensive. It reduced everything to a caricature. The photo showed Aiden smiling and Melanie blurred in the background. She stayed silent for several minutes after reading it. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just sat on the bench in front of the bakery and stared at the sky. When Aiden arrived, he already knew the damage. "I didn't want this to happen," he said. "But it did," she replied. And inside, a part of her went quiet again. Aiden sat beside her, but didn't try to justify himself. He had learned that sometimes the best apology was simply staying. So he stayed. He bought flowers, not to ask for forgiveness, but to remind her he was there. He washed the sidewalk. He made coffee. And he waited. When Melanie finally spoke, it was in a soft voice. "I don't want you to disappear from my life, but I also don't want to be a footnote in yours." He held her hand firmly. "Then help me do this differently." The days began to flow more gently again. They started establishing small rituals. Coffee on Wednesdays, simple dinners on Fridays, aimless walks on Sunday mornings. There were no promises, but there was presence. And that began to heal the wounds. Melanie, who once expected the worst, began allowing herself to imagine the best. And Aiden, who once ran from what he felt, began facing his own heart. They discovered that a relationship is not built on perfection, but on daily choices. Even when the world tries to pull you off course. One night, while washing dishes together, Melanie said something that lingered in the air. "You know what I feared the most?" Aiden replied, "That I'd leave?" She shook her head. "I feared you'd stay, but stop seeing me." He stopped washing, water dripping from his fingers. "I see you, Melanie, more than anyone ever has." And she finally believed it. Trust returned slowly, like a child learning to walk. Melanie didn't demand instant answers, and Aiden no longer promised more than he could deliver. They met in the middle, and the middle was a safe place. When they argued, because they still did, it was no longer about winning, but about understanding. And that was new for both of them. Their life wasn't perfect, but at this point, neither of them wanted perfection. They wanted peace, and they discovered that peace was possible together. One Saturday morning, Aiden invited Melanie for a picnic in the countryside. They took fruit, bread, and books. They lay under the cloudy sky and stayed silent for long minutes. "Have you ever thought about having a different life?" he asked. "I have, but then I realized what matters isn't the scenery. It's who's beside me." He looked at her with gratitude. "And you?" she asked. Aiden took a deep breath. "I've had every life money could buy, but this is the only one that feels real." Time began to bring color to what once was only black and white. Melanie went back to humming while she cooked. Aiden learned to enjoy the small-town noises. He started making real friends, laughing at simple jokes, getting used to the sound of his own humanity. The scars were still there, of course. The fears too. But now there was room for something bigger. Something that grew slowly but had roots. And they had learned that when love has roots, not even the strongest wind can pull it out. Melanie, who once didn't want to depend on anyone, began to understand that sharing wasn't weakness. And Aiden, who had always been taught to control everything, discovered the strength in surrender. One Sunday afternoon, he surprised her with a handwritten letter. In it, he wrote, "I don't know how to love the way you love, but I'm learning from you. And I hope that, with time, you'll see that I can be someone you build something with, not just someone who shows up to disrupt it." Melanie cried, but it was a good cry, the kind that cleans from the inside out. They started dreaming together. Small dreams, renovating the bakery's facade, organizing the town's pie festival, adopting a cat. And big dreams, maybe living in a house with a porch, maybe traveling to watch the stars in the desert, maybe growing old together. Everything was still a maybe, but what used to be fear was now possibility. And with that, hope settled in slowly, not as a shout, but as a whisper that grew stronger every day. One evening, while walking hand in hand, Aiden stopped. "I had a crazy idea," he said. Melanie raised an eyebrow. "I'm wary of crazy ideas from billionaires. What if I invested in the town? Restored the library, the cinema, the market? With your name on everything?" "No, with yours." Melanie froze. "I don't need tributes, Aiden. It's not about tribute. It's about giving back to this place everything it gave. Me through you." She stayed silent. "Can I do that for us?" She took a deep breath. "You can, if you promise it won't turn into a marketing campaign." The next day, they began the first plans. Simple, small, with the community's involvement. Nothing grandiose. Nothing that would strip the place of its identity. The town got involved. People began to see them differently. Aiden was no longer just the rich man. He was the man who stayed. And Melanie, she was the heart of it all. One day, at the end of a community meeting, an elderly woman approached Melanie. "He's different by your side, dear." Melanie smiled. "Maybe because I don't expect anything from him but the truth." The woman squeezed her hand. "Stay that way, and he'll never leave." And for the first time, Melanie believed it was possible. Later that same day, Aiden took her to the square where it all began. The bench where he used to wait for her. "You healed me without meaning to," he said. "And you taught me I can be strong even with someone beside me." They embraced without rush. The wind blew softly. And in that embrace, there was permanence. Their love was no longer impulse. It was a decision. It was daily action. It was looking into each other's eyes and choosing again. They knew there would still be obstacles, but now they knew how to face them together, one day at a time. And so, their love learned to stay, without fear of leaving, without fear of failing. With scars, yes, but with roots. Because sometimes, what saves a broken heart isn't someone who comes to fix it. It's someone who chooses to stay, even knowing they might get hurt. The stability Melanie and Aiden had built finally seemed solid. The eyes of the town no longer weighed so heavily on them, and their differences had turned into compliments. People began to see them as an unlikely, yet admirable couple, and they themselves were starting to believe that their love really could beat the odds. But not every threat comes from the outside. Sometimes, the deepest crack appears where you thought you were safe. And this time, the storm began from within. Silent, subtle, but devastating. It all started with a message. A notification on Aiden's phone, left on the bakery counter. Melanie wasn't the type to snoop, but the name flashing on the screen froze her in place. "Rachel, we need to talk. It's urgent." Melanie's stomach twisted. She didn't know if she was ready to relive insecurities. She thought she had overcome, but she knew she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. When Aiden came back from the back of the bakery, Melanie's demeanor was colder. He noticed immediately. "Everything okay? You got a message." He frowned. "From who?" "Rachel." Aiden sighed, as if he had already been expecting this. "She's shown up again, yes. Says she has something to tell me. But I didn't pay attention. Are you going to answer her? I don't know. Maybe I should put an end to this once and for all. Melanie crossed her arms. Why does she still think she can talk to you? The question stung them both, more than it seemed in the days that followed. Melanie tried to act normal, but the tension lingered. Aiden grew quieter. They circled each other, avoiding the elephant in the room. Until one afternoon, Aiden decided to go alone to the neighboring city. He said he needed to take care of things for the social project. Melanie nodded, but her heart already knew. He was going to see Rachel. That night, she couldn't sleep. She made tea, read 2 pages, and put the book down. Checked her phone 20 times. No messages, no calls, just silence, the kind that cuts. Deep down, she didn't want control. She only wanted the truth. But sometimes, the truth is far too painful. When Aiden came back the next day, Melanie was no longer the same. He walked in to find her sweeping the front of the bakery, her eyes empty. "Hi," he said softly. "Did she tell you what she wanted?" "She did. And are you going to tell me?" "She says she's going to sue the company." Melanie turned slowly. "Why?" "She claims I made promises of a business partnership I didn't keep. Says she has proof." "Does she?" "No," he answered firmly. "But could this become a scandal?" "Yes. And unfortunately, you could get dragged into it." The news spread fast. Websites began posting malicious headlines. Ex-fiancé accuses billionaire of fraud. New girlfriend at the center of it all. The townspeople started whispering again. Customers disappeared. The trust they had fought for began to crumble. And with it, Melanie's peace. Aiden did everything he could to shield her. But the truth was, he couldn't protect her from everything. He was in the center of a storm, and, even without guilt, bore the consequences. Melanie felt swallowed by something she had never asked for. "I don't want to become a headline in your story, Aiden," she told him one night. "You are my story," he replied. But sometimes, even that isn't enough. Amid the chaos, Melanie began to question everything. If their love was strong enough, if Aiden could truly put her first, if she could carry the weight of a world that wasn't hers. "I'm getting tired, Aiden," she confessed. "I know," he said, taking her hand. "But tell me what makes you want to stay." "The hope that when all this is over, we'll still be together," she replied. It was the first time she admitted she was close to giving up. And he knew, either he held on to her now, or he'd lose her forever. In the following days, he canceled commitments, stepped away from the company, and stayed with her. Helped bake bread, delivered orders, washed dishes, proved, in every gesture, that she came first. And little by little, trust began to breathe again. But Rachel didn't stop. Each week, there was a new accusation. The press kept pressing. Advisors insisted he distance himself from Melanie for strategy. Aiden refused. He said, "Either she stays or I go." And he went. The news hit like a bomb. Billionaire steps down for love. Melanie felt exposed, but also protected. Aiden handed in his CEO badge and said, "I want to take my life back. And it starts with you." She cried, but not out of fear, out of relief. The days were intense. The storm hadn't fully passed, but they were together, even if the world didn't understand. Aiden rented a warehouse in town to start a local project. Nothing grand, just something that kept them connected to what was real. One rainy night, as they cleaned the floor of the new space, Melanie burst out laughing after slipping. Aiden fell with her, soaked, dirty, and laughing uncontrollably. They looked at each other like they had in the beginning. If anyone saw the billionaire on the floor with a mop, they'd understand this is where I belong. And they kissed there, among buckets and leaky ceilings. It was the most honest scene they had ever lived. Gradually, the scandal lost its grip. Rachel lost credibility. The lawsuits proved unfounded. Aiden's company survived, even without him at the helm. But most importantly, their love endured. Marked yes, but alive. One morning, Aiden showed up at the bakery with an envelope. "I signed it today. Made my resignation official." Melanie looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "More than ever." And in that envelope, there wasn't an ending. There was freedom. They celebrated with coffee, pie, and comfortable silence. No spotlights, no cameras, just them. And for the first time, it felt like the storm had truly passed. Not unscathed, but stronger. And so, after nearly losing each other, they discovered that love, when true, survives even the fiercest storms. Because more than choosing each other on the easy days, It's standing firm on the hard ones. And even soaked, bruised, and exhausted, Melanie and Aiden were still standing. Together, Aiden and Melanie's new routine was simple, perhaps even ordinary to those who didn't know the story. He woke up early, made coffee, and opened the warehouse where he planned to start a training center for local youth. She continued with the bakery, doing what she had always done, feeding bodies and souls with her bread and her presence. There were no more headlines, no cameras, no rumors. But there were no empty promises either. What there was permanence. Every morning, they chose to start over. Together. One afternoon, as she was closing the register, Melanie looked through the window and saw Aiden talking to a group of teenagers. They were laughing, gesturing, clearly connected. It was strange to see him so at ease there, in an environment that had once been so far from his world. But she knew he wasn't adapting. He was revealing himself. Aiden hadn't changed for her. He had simply, little by little, removed the armor he wore out of fear. And now, out there, was the man he had always been, but had only learned to be with her. The community began to truly respect him, not because of his money, but because of his actions. He didn't hand out checks. He listened, fixed chairs, painted walls, donated time. Many took a while to understand that this change was real, but not Melanie. From the start, she had seen something in his eyes. Something broken, yes, but still beating. And now, it was impossible to ignore. Aiden hadn't just stayed, he belonged. And that had no price. On a cold night, they were sitting on her porch, wrapped in blankets. No, Aiden began. When I was younger, I thought everything could be fixed with control. Melanie looked at him, curious. Now I understand that some things can only be fixed with surrender. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. And what made you realize that? He took a deep breath. The way you stay, even when everything falls apart. She didn't answer. She just pulled the blanket tighter. And he understood. She felt the same. The town organized a fall fair, and Melanie was invited to lead the committee. She refused at first, but Aiden encouraged her. You've always been the heart of this place. People are only just starting to see it. She accepted, cautiously. She feared the backstage work, the judgment, the effort. But she dove into the project. Aiden, as always, stayed behind the scenes, helping, suggesting, supporting. He knew this was her time to shine, and he didn't want to overshadow her. He wanted to light the way with her. While setting up the stalls, Aiden noticed Melanie was quieter than usual. You okay? He asked. She hesitated. Sometimes I think I still don't deserve all of this. He took her by the shoulders. You deserve more than this. You just need to stop measuring yourself with the rulers they gave you when they tried to make you small. Melanie's eyes burned. Sometimes it still hurts. Aiden rested his forehead against hers. I know, but I'm here, and I'll stay, even when it hurts. The fair was a success. The whole town came. Children ran, couples danced, and the scents of apple, cinnamon, and fresh bread floated through the air. Melanie rushed from one place to another, solving everything with calm and grace. Aiden watched her from afar, enchanted. She was a leader, a hostess, and still found time to hug every child who passed by. When it was all over, she was exhausted, but her eyes shone in a way he'd never forget. You were born for this, he said, to transform everything you touch. And she replied, I just plant. The ones who bloom are the ones who choose to stay. On a rainy afternoon, Aiden showed up at the bakery with an envelope. Inside was a document, the deed to a small lot at the end of the street. It's for you, he said, for when you want to grow. Melanie looked surprised. I don't need more space. He smiled. Maybe not now, but you need to know you can, that you're capable, that you deserve to expand. She touched the envelope gently, and for the first time, she allowed herself to dream big. Not because she needed to prove something, but because now she believed in herself. They began to share more books, ideas, memories. One day, Melanie told him about her mother, who died young, and how she had learned to bake bread to feed her siblings. Aiden listened in silence, his eyes glassy. You took care of everyone, but who took care of you? She laughed shyly. No one. Until now. He pulled her close. I didn't come to save you. I came to stay. And in that embrace, there was no pain. There was healing. One Saturday night, they hosted a simple dinner in the warehouse. Town friends, project students, neighbors. all gathered around makeshift tables, with lights hanging from the ceiling. Aiden made a toast. To the new beginnings we never planned, but that save us from ourselves. Melanie held his hand under the table. To those who learn to love in the right time, not the perfect time. The night ended with soft music, easy laughter, and bright eyes. And in that simplicity, there was everything. One day, Aiden went to visit the sister of a former employee. It was an important visit, and Melanie offered to go along. But he gently declined. "You need to rest, and I need to do this alone." She understood. Sometimes, love also meant giving space. He came back the next day, with heavy eyes and quiet lips. Only at night did he share that he had visited his father's grave, a man he hadn't spoken to in years. "I asked for forgiveness. Not for him. For me." Melanie hugged him. Staying takes courage, but going back takes even more. The months passed lightly. There was no urgency anymore. There was presence. Melanie started a cooking workshop for teenagers, and Aiden began writing a book, not about business, but about new beginnings. Sometimes they shared the same table in silence. Other times, they talked late into the night. The passion was still there, but with less fire and more warmth. It was love that didn't burn, it warmed. And in the comfort of routine, they understood. They were living what many spend a lifetime searching for. One winter morning, they woke to a fog-covered town. Melanie made coffee, and they stood by the window. "Do you miss anything?" she asked. "Sometimes, I miss the time when I didn't know what I was losing. And now I'm afraid of losing." She smiled, touching his hand. True love doesn't need to be held tightly. It just needs to be cared for. And he understood. Staying was a gesture, not a prison. An unexpected piece of news arrived in February. A journalist wanted to write an article about real stories of reconnection. Aiden refused immediately. "We don't need to prove anything." Melanie agreed. "Our love doesn't need a headline. It needs silence." They decided to keep everything as it was, away from the spotlight, close to what was real. And that's when they understood what so many don't. Sometimes, protecting a story is the greatest act of love. One night, lying in the porch hammock, Aiden spoke. "You know what I've learned from you? That bread with butter can cure any sadness." That too. But mostly, that staying is a daily decision. She looked at him tenderly. "And you keep deciding? Every day? Including tomorrow." Melanie's birthday was coming, and Aiden prepared something special. No luxury, no flashy surprises. Just a dinner in the backyard, with old photos, wildflowers, and soft music in the background. In the middle of dinner, he stood up and said, "You taught me that love doesn't shout. It shows." And he handed her a box of letters, one for each day they had been together. Melanie cried. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me." He held her hands. And there's still so much more to come. Their life wasn't perfect. They still had bad days, disagreements, fears. But now they knew how to weather the storms. They didn't attack. They listened. And that made all the difference. When someone asked, "How did you make it work?" they always answered with the same phrase: "By choosing to stay." Because in the end, it wasn't about luck. It was about choice. And they were choosing each other every day. One Sunday, Aiden received an invitation to return to the company as a consultant. He said no without hesitation. "There, I was just noise. Here, I am whole." Melanie looked at him with pride. "You don't need to prove anything anymore." He smiled. "Not proof, but I can keep building." And so, together, they kept building what had once seemed impossible. A love that was real, every day, and alive. That month, Melanie decided to paint a quote on the bakery wall. She wrote it by hand, letter by letter. "True love doesn't arrive shouting. It sits, listens, and stays." People took pictures. They shared it. They were moved. But only Aiden knew where that phrase came from. It was the summary of everything they had lived, and everything they still would live. In silence, but with truth. And so, in that small corner of the world, Melanie and Aiden's love didn't make the news. It didn't win awards or magazine covers, but it became roots. It stayed. And in the end, that was enough. Winter arrived quietly in Harper Hill, covering the mornings in mist and the afternoons in a cutting breeze. Melanie's bakery became a refuge for those seeking more than fresh bread. They came for warmth, kindness, and presence. Aiden remained by her side, keeping the same calm and steady routine. There was no rush anymore, no doubts, just two lives that, without realizing it, had become firmly intertwined. And in the silence that filled those cold days, something grew that words couldn't explain. Real love isn't measured by noise, but by what remains, even when everything else is still. Aiden loved watching Melanie work. Every movement she made was precise, intentional. The way she wiped the counter, smiled at customers, adjusted the recipe with the touch of someone who had learned from life rather than books. He saw in her a woman who knew the weight of the world but chose lightness anyway. That's what kept him captivated. Not her talent, not her strength, but her daily choice to remain light, even after walking through so many shadows. He, who had been made of noise, now found peace just watching her breathe. Melanie, in turn, saw him differently too. Aiden was no longer the lost man in the rain, nor the CEO from the headlines. He was just him, the man who could listen without interrupting, who now laughed easily, who knelt to tie the shoelaces of children on the street. He was still intense, still irritated by bureaucracy, still spoke too loudly on the phone. But he was also the man who made coffee before she woke, who left notes in her recipe notebook, who knew when silence was the best gift. And that was exactly why she loved him. One day, a child came into the bakery and handed Melanie an envelope. Inside was an invitation. The town school had chosen her as the year's honoree at the community festival. For your generosity, resilience, and silent impact, it read. Melanie smiled shyly. She never liked the spotlight. But this felt different, as if the town was saying, "We see you." And for the first time, she felt like she belonged. When she told Aiden, he hugged her and said, "You don't need a stage, but you deserve every bit of applause." The day of the tribute arrived, and the school was decorated with paper lights and drawings made by the students. Melanie was nervous, wearing a simple but beautiful dress. Aiden stood beside her, quiet. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was hesitant at first, but soon grew warm and genuine. She didn't give a speech. She simply thanked them with tearful eyes. And in that moving silence, Aiden felt his heart tighten, not from sadness, but from gratitude, for choosing a woman who spoke little, yet transformed everything. After the ceremony, they walked hand in hand to the square. They sat on the same bench where they had met so many times in the beginning. Aiden pulled a small box from his pocket. Melanie's eyes widened. "Relax," he laughed. "It's not what you think." Inside was a simple matte silver ring. "I don't want to make promises. I just want to seal choices." She took a breath. "And what are you choosing today?" He answered without hesitation. "To stay. In every way." She slipped the ring onto her finger. No words, just presence. That night, they danced in the backyard under the leftover lights from the festival. There was no music, just the sound of wind, branches, and their steps finding each other on the dirt. Melanie laughed softly when he stepped on her foot. Aiden feigned indignation. "You distracted me." She pressed her forehead to his. "You're a terrible dancer. But I'm here. And that's everything." And it truly was. In the simplicity of that clumsy dance, there was more truth than in many grand vows. Over the weeks, their routine fell perfectly into place. The training center began operating with help from the town's youth. Melanie taught recipes and trades. In her spare hours, Aiden coordinated workshops on finance, reading, and creativity. They discovered that teaching was another way of loving. And the more they shared, the more they received in return. Their love now spread through gestures, through smiles, through stories crossing paths by chance. And when they looked at each other at the end of the day, the same spark was still there. Perhaps even stronger. One morning, Melanie woke to find a note stuck to her coffee cup. "Today marks 1 year since you cared for me in that rain. And I still remember every drop, every touch, every silence. Thank you for not walking past." She folded the note with care and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Aiden was still writing his book, but no longer thought of publishing it. "Maybe I just want it recorded. For me. For you." Melanie read some passages and smiled. No one would believe the billionaire became a small-town baker. That's because he didn't. He just remembered who he always was. And what is he now? A man who learned to listen. And finally, to love. On a rainy Saturday, the bakery was packed. The lights went out. They ran out of flour. A customer complained loudly. Melanie took deep breaths, trying to keep her balance. Aiden appeared with rolled-up sleeves and a smile. "You want me to handle the customers or mop the floor? Just stay close," she said. And he did. After that day, Melanie understood that love isn't about fixing everything. It's about having someone who doesn't run when things go wrong. Someone who mops the floor with you, who holds your hand when the world gets heavy, who says, "I'll stay," without saying it at all. Because the love that remains shows itself in ordinary days. In the smallest gestures. Sometimes, ghosts of the past still showed up. An old news story, a familiar name, but it didn't hurt anymore. They had strengthened the bridge between them, and now they knew how to cross the gaps together. There was no more fear, only certainty. Autumn came with golden leaves covering the bakery's sidewalk. Children played in piles of leaves, laughing loudly. Melanie watched through the window, coffee in hand. Aiden came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Looks like a movie scene, but it's just Tuesday, and still it's perfect. An older woman walked into the bakery and told Melanie, "I see the way he looks at you." Melanie smiled shyly. "And the way you look at him. It's not the kind of love that burns. It's the kind that warms." Melanie nodded. "Yes, and that's why it lasts." That night, they sat on the porch with blankets over their knees. The silence between them was full of meaning. Aiden looked at her and said, "If today were our last day, I'd be at peace." Melanie squeezed his hand. "Because you've lived it all. Because I've truly loved." Time passed slowly, but with weight and depth. They had aged a little, or maybe just matured. The wounds had healed. The noise had faded, and the love remained. One Sunday, Melanie wrote on the bakery's chalkboard, "Love is what's left when the magic fades and the choice remains." Customers took photos, shared it, felt moved. But she knew that phrase belonged to them, written with gestures, with pain, with new beginnings, and above all, with permanence. Because lived love doesn't need explanation. When people asked how they made it work, Melanie replied, "By staying when it was easier to leave, by listening when it was easier to shout, by caring when it was easier to blame." And maybe that was all. Maybe the secret wasn't magic, just human. And so, without solemn promises, without golden rings or expensive dinners, Melanie and Aiden chose to remain on the same bench, the same porch, the same life, with a love that didn't need to be announced, only felt. The love that stays, even when there are no words left. If this story touched something in you, imagine how many more are yet to come. Here, every story is a reminder that true love still exists, even when the world falls apart, even when it seems impossible. Because when someone chooses to stay, everything changes. Share your thoughts below. Do you believe love can be rebuilt with simple gestures? Like the video if this story moved you. Share it with someone special, someone who also believes in the power of love that remains. And subscribe now so you don't miss the next story. Because when you subscribe, you become part of a space where love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. I'll see you in the next story. Don't miss it.